That look good, Tracy?
That looks good.
All right, well, we'll get started here. Thank you all so much for joining us today. This is something new we're trying. We're trying to get as much information out to the people that need it, that work with our kids. And really, I'm really starting to appreciate our work we're doing with paraeducators. I feel like you are the driving force behind a lot of our programs. And we're just here to offer as much support as possible so everybody's good and confident in their job and efficient and learn some evidence-based strategies to support our students. So today we are going to get started with prompting. This is our first session in the series, and we're going to talk a little bit about prompting. So as we move through this, if you have any questions, we'll be monitoring the chat. And if you're just getting on here, there's a link in the chat for people to sign in just so we know who's here. We're going to have some follow-up emails that go out and some feedback and evaluations for us, but also a way to stay in touch and you're aware about our next series coming up. So today, we're going to talk about prompting. And really what we're trying to get away from is having our students become dependent on the prompts we're providing. So being prompt dependent implies the learner's fault. It's not, it's the instructor's fault. We have to teach the student to prevent learning to rely on the prompts. So I do like this little ad about the family circus, little ad. It's cartoon, family circus. This is what you see a lot of times. Children become prompt dependent on what they do. So when somebody gives you something, you wait for them to say, and what do you say? And then you say, thank you. It's a prime example of becoming dependent on prompts. They're not going to do the wanted behavior or skill until they get that prompt. So our whole goal is to move students towards independency. So this is a prompt hierarchy. Many of y'all may be familiar with the prompt hierarchy, but it's really important to have an outlined prompt hierarchy in your classroom. Now, how this is arranged, you see on the sides, it says most to least and least to most. So the least intrusive prompts to allow the student to perform a skill are at the top. And as we move down, they become more intrusive. So we're providing more support for the student to kind of get them to the correct answer or the wanted behavior. But as you see, we want to move up towards and provide the least amount of prompts possible for a student to be able to perform the skill. So when we go over these, we start at the top with the least invasive prompt, which is just a natural cue. And actually, that's no prompt at all. A natural cues, for example, if the doorbell rings, somebody will go answer the doorbell. They were prompted to do a behavior and they didn't need any prompting from us. The natural cue was enough to initiate that behavior. So as we move down, we have gestures too, which it's as simple as motioning towards the correct response. For example, if the doorbell rings and the student does nothing, we can just gesture our hand towards the doorway or nod our head towards the doorway. It's not giving the student the total skill. We're just providing another level of support beyond that natural cue. Now, verbal prompting is one we do a lot in the classroom. The verbal prompt is a use of specific verbal statement that tells the student what to do and how to do it. I always think of playing games with my students. So if you're playing a game of Uno and somebody lays a red 2, the natural cue is for that student to play the next card. Now, a gesture may not be that effective, but we could tell the student, now you can play a red card or a card with the number 2 on it. That would be a verbal prompt to initiate the correct response. So remember, a verbal prompt is not a suggestion or cueing a direction like, let's play Uno. It's the prompt needed to get to the specific behavior that you're looking for. So as we move on down to a little bit more intrusive, we have verbal or picture prompts. Now, I'm kind of split on where these fall in the range because sometimes that's a little bit less intrusive than a verbal prompt if a student's dependent on using like visual supports throughout the day. But a visual prompt, for example, provides a picture or drawing to help the student initiate a behavior. So a drawing of clock hands arranged to indicate a particular time with pictures showing individuals engaging in certain activity, kind of like we follow our visual schedules. The picture or the visual support is prompting the student to initiate that behavior. Now, The next one is probably one of our biggest ones for a lot of the students we work with that require more prompting to be successful in specific skills, and that is a model. And a model is simply demonstrating the behavior, doing it yourself, kind of the I do, you do, we do model. This is the I do. So if it's time to go outside and it's a little cool outside, we may want to have our students get appropriately dressed for the weather outside and maybe putting on a jacket. So if the student stands there and does nothing with the natural cue when we say it's cold outside, we may lead down to a verbal prompt. Well, it's time to put our jackets on. If the student still doesn't respond, we'll move on down to a more invasive prompt, which would be a model. Well, we'll take our jacket and physically put it on ourselves to model that behavior. So you see, we're getting a little more involved as we move down this prompt hierarchy towards more intrusive prompting. Now, the last prompt is a physical prompt, and we will talk a little bit about communication because on most prompt hierarchies you see for communication, a physical prompt is not one listed, just because all communication needs to be initiated by the individual and not so much us doing it for them. But a physical prompt is providing physical assistance to help the student perform the skills successfully. There are full physical prompts, which in the past you may have heard the term hand over hand. We'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But a full physical prompt is using your hand to physically guide the student towards the correct response. Now, a more appropriate method that we're going to talk about in a second is hand under hand. Allows the student a little more autonomy than actually doing the skill for them hand over hand. But your physical prompts can be divided into two areas: a partial physical prompt, which may be guiding the student's elbow towards a task and he still has full autonomy use of his hand, or a full physical prompt where we're actually doing the hand under hand model and guiding the student towards the correct responses. So the whole goal is for you to do the minimal amount of prompting to help the student be successful. And that's why this is kind of a balancing act. And really knowing this prompt hierarchy is the first step of where to move down, how to provide less supports, but still help the student be successful in performing the skills. Any questions about the prompt hierarchy? I know I went through that really fast, but I had a little script to read, and I don't really like doing that, but I want to make sure everybody's clear on how that moves down into more intrusive prompts.
And in your resource folder that we will email out at the end of this training will be a copy of that prompt hierarchy so that you have it to refer to.
Now, you have several different types of skills you provide prompts on. You have your single response skills, such as identifying shapes, letters, and colors. Those are your discrete skills that have one correct response. But you also have skills or activities that are a group of skills chained together that we call a task analysis. And a task analysis is basically taking a larger skill and breaking it down into individual steps that a student can complete. And then we can provide supports or different levels of prompting on each one of those steps as needed. But this is important because a lot of our students do activities. Well, that student can't tie a shoe, or that student can't do this, the full getting ready activity, where really it's a lot of different steps, and they probably can do a lot of that independently, but need a certain level of prompting on certain skills. So we break down these skills into a task analysis and that's used to increase independence because many of those steps they can perform independently. So I think of skills like tying your shoe or stuff that's not a single step where there's a lot of individual skills to teach. And first you have your overhand knot. That would be the first step. That student may be able to do that independently, but may require a model in the next step of wrapping the loop around the string or however you break down that skill. So it breaks down these complex skills into teachable steps. But always remember, smaller steps are not always better. And I say that because our task analysis can get a little too in-depth. Like I can make one for making a quick sandwich that may have 6 steps that a student can follow, but I can really break that down into 30 or more steps. Now, having all those small steps is not necessarily a better thing. We just want to identify the steps that the student may need some prompting intervention so that we can help that student complete that chain skill independently or with the least supports required to get them to perform that skill. But a task analysis is a great thing for your longer skills. You want to look at the small teachable steps that you can help build a student up to being successful on that skill. Now, when do we prompt? That's often something we really have to think about a lot. There is a wait time required. And again, these wait times, sometimes the most effective thing to do is nothing. Once you provide a stimulus to perform a skill or a stimulus prompt, can the student perform it? We kind of have to wait and gauge. And this is where we're going to kind of use our tools that we're talked about already, is understanding that prompt hierarchy. If the student doesn't perform that skill within that wait time, what level of prompting are we going to lead into? And I always like to move down that prompt, start with the least intrusive prompt, such as a verbal prompt or a gesture, before I move into modeling or even a physical prompt. Physical prompt's always our last resort. So wait time is after giving an instruction, wait for the child to process that information. I mean, did they physically hear everything you said? Are they starting to understand the prompt or the request that's asked of them? And there may be some problem solving that goes along with each step. So not all steps are a set amount of time, and it's going to be different for each student. You may have students with maybe a traumatic brain injury that requires, a much longer processing time than, many other students. But we increase this pause time over time to promote independence. So once they start performing these skills with prompting, we can increase that wait time over time to allow them the time to process that, think about what they need to do, and then physically start performing the skill before we start delivering prompts. Because again, I can't say this enough. Our whole goal is to guide the student to respond automatically by those natural cues or stimuluses. This is where Tracy's come in and talk about your hand under hand, because this is something that, as an old school MSD teacher, that's what I am. I was always taught hand over hand, hand over hand. That's your physical prompt we go to. And the more I learn about it, the more I realize how wrong I was. So I'm going to let Tracy jump in and kind of explain this here.
All right. So kind of as Kevin said, if you've been in special education at all, many of us were taught to use hand over hand when we were working with our students, particularly with those with moderate severe disabilities. But research is really coming out now showing that is not the best reason, and it's not good for several reasons. So we're going to talk a little bit about that today. The first thing I want to remind you about is you're always going to go from that least to most restrictive type of intervention when we're doing this prompting. So as Kevin showed you that hierarchy earlier, again, you really want to start with those natural supports and gestural supports if at all possible. So again, this hand under hand is really going to be your last resort if we have to do it. So we're going to watch this video. I'll go ahead and pre-warn you. It's got a little bit of a robotic voice, which I don't love, but the information within this video is really good. And I really want you to think about how it applies to your students.
I see that many parents and professionals are still being taught hand over hand. In the disabled community, that is frowned upon because we want disabled kids to learn that nobody should touch their bodies without permission. We teach hand under hand instead. Bodily autonomy is important. But that's not the only reason why. Many have fine motor problems. Moving someone's hand doesn't teach their hands how to do something, but hand under hand teaches them by them feeling the movements your hand makes while you move. With the added benefit that the disabled person can take their hand away anytime they want as an act of self-advocacy.
Okay, so as those of us that work in education, I know we don't like it when students say no, but we really do want them to have the autonomy to be able to say no. And again, this is really important with our moderate severe students, particularly if they're a non-speaking individual, because if they are so compliant driven to just do whatever the adult tells them to do by grabbing them, we're just setting them up for failure. In the middle of Walmart, a stranger comes and grabs their hand and starts to walk off with them. They're just compliant and they go with them. And then there's the actual skill of learning the item that you're trying to do. when you do hand over hand, and again, guilty, did it when I was in the classroom because that's what I was taught years ago. It's very intrusive to grab somebody's hand and you're kind of squishing up their little fingers because those babies are so small, especially at those younger age. So you're really not teaching them the proper way to hold an item or use an item. When you go and put your hand underneath their hand, they get to feel how your fingers are moving, how your wrist is moving, and they have the autonomy to pull away. And then something they did not mention in that video that is very important. Again, we know our students have sensory needs. So again, they may not like to be touched and grabbed like that. So by doing the hand underhand, it really allows them to kind of control how much pressure, how much contact there is with us. And it's a lot easier to gradually release that. I know I've worked with students because I was primarily in the middle school. So if they had done a lot of hand over hand in elementary school and I would sit down to work with them, they would just put their hand out because they're waiting for me to grab it and basically do it for them. And if you guys think, you've probably have worked with students like that. So again, we're really trying to get away from hand over hand and go to that hand underhand when we're working with our students. So that's going to be new for many of you. It's still a little bit new for Kevin and I, and we kind of have to remind ourselves too to reposition because again, we were trained in a different way for years. So next up on the screen here is a planning guide, and a copy of this is going to be in the resources that we will email after this training. If you are newer to your position or you're working with a teacher that's new to you, this might be a very helpful form to use. If you've been around and have worked with your supervising teacher for a while, you probably don't need a formal plan like this, but in your head, you're still going through these processes. So on this first plan, we're looking at Ellis. And so you can see they're working on these skills in the cafeteria, and they want him to be able to make a choice from the lunch menu each day. So they've kind of listed which prompts he needs. So you've got the verbal, the less restrictive and more restrictive verbal. You also have visual. And then at the bottom part there, you have the order of prompts. So again, we're always going to go for least intrusive. So they've got that independent, or hopefully Ellis will just independently make a choice from the lunch menu. We're going to wait. And that's hard. It gets awkward. Like when I stopped there, that was probably 5 seconds, but it's awkward. But we need to give them that wait time, let them process, and give them a chance to move and make those selections. If that doesn't work, I'm going to go to my level 2 prompt of giving him a visual. So I'm going to show him the visual prompts of the lunch menu choices. And hopefully that's going to get him going. If that doesn't work, then I'm going to move on down to level 3 and level 4. Over on this other side of the screen, there's another student here, and this is Leah. She's working on her independent work center. They want her working on puzzles here. So again, they've got the type of prompts, because even though you have this prompt hierarchy, you don't necessarily just go from one to the other to the other. For some students, you do, but for some, again, you know where you need to start. Like for Ellis, we knew we need to start at verbal if he doesn't do the, or I'm sorry, at visual if he doesn't do the independent. So over here for Leah, we're going to start, of course, independent. If that doesn't work, we're going to go to gestural and we're going to point to the puzzle pieces. If that doesn't work, we're going to do a partial physical. So again, we're still not touching her hands, but we're just going to lift her elbow up to kind of get her hand up and in position. And then if that doesn't work, they're going to use the full physical of hand underhand to help her to begin that task. So again, these planning guide sheets are just really good to kind of talk through that, particularly on activities that you've been assigned to with these students, and to talk about what level of support do they need, how do you need to prompt them, and just know exactly what it is that you're working on. So like I said, there's going to be copies of this in your resource folder. All right. On all of the evidence-based practices, we are going to talk about reinforcement has to be paired with them. Children and adults are not going to change their behavior unless there is some type of reinforcement, and that just increases the likelihood that a behavior will take place. So on those planning sheets, there is a list that can be put on there of the reinforcements. But again, which reinforcements are appropriate for which task can vary. Because like for Ellis, if he's in the cafeteria, we don't want to be reinforcing him with goldfish because we're wanting him to make other lunch choices. So we definitely don't want to be giving him food reinforcement because that's going to take away. So for him, they've got this social praise and thumbs up. That's the reinforcement that works for him and works in that environment. For Miss Lee over here, you see they actually have several reinforcements, but they kind of did a check mark when she's working on her puzzle that these are the reinforcements of just giving her that social praise. Good job working, Leah, or giving her that high five. Because again, we don't want to be giving her Legos. We don't want to go sit outside with her when she's supposed to be doing those puzzles. So there's reinforcements that are appropriate based on the activity and the prompting that we are giving them at that moment. So again, these planning sheets are just really good discussion points. You may think you know what somebody's reinforcement is, but you might need to kind of process that with your supervising teacher and really kind of talk about what works and what doesn't work for them. All right, so again, we know these little parabytes are very short and quick trainings. So we're kind of throwing a lot of information at you. We are going to be sharing resources with you via email, but here is another great video that's going to kind of summarize some of the information that we've shared and let you see it in action.
In this video, we'll briefly go over a few frequently used prompts and how to fade them successfully to increase your child's independence during structured routines and daily tasks. A prompt is considered any time you provide help after an instruction is given. Various types of prompts can be observed in our everyday lives. Consider crossing the street, for example. The light turns green, now what? A visual prompt would be the walk sign flashing. A verbal prompt would be someone telling you to walk. A modeled prompt would be someone walking ahead of you to show you how it's done. And a physical prompt would be someone holding your hand and helping you cross the street. All of these types of prompts can be very helpful when your child is learning a new skill. However, too much prompting can lead to prompt dependency, where a child relies on that prompt even if they know exactly what to do. Prompt dependency makes it difficult for a child to gain independence, so it's important to know how to fade quickly enough that your child doesn't become dependent, but slowly enough that the student remains successful. So, when is the right time to fade your prompts during an activity or task? Consider your child's age and current skill level, and think of the types of prompts you're using and how often you're providing assistance with successful results. Let's use writing the letter L as an example. This child's current skills include attending to a task, appropriate hand grasp, and making a straight vertical line. This child can successfully draw a line down when making a letter L, but needs physical prompting to stop at the end and change the line's direction to finish writing the letter. Continue providing these physical prompts, but once you've noticed that they're able to complete the task 3 to 5 times with more ease, consider fading back to a lesser prompt that gives them more room for independence, such as modeling what to do. Make sure to verbally encourage your child along the way. Again, once they show improvement with your modeling, then consider taking a further step back. The ultimate goal is to teach them greater independence. Prompt fading can be applied to a variety of situations where your child has become dependent on your assistance, such as zipping up a jacket, opening a snack, or washing their hands. They need your help, and that's okay. But it's important to remember to pause and give wait time to encourage the thinking process, rather than immediately stepping in to help. Practice and consistency will guarantee more independence as they learn and grow.
All right, so you saw in that video, again, we're always going to go from least to most amount of prompting. Our goal is always independence for our students. So we want to work on fading. Just because we were doing partial physical prompting doesn't mean that's where we stay. We do want to kind of work on fading that out and backing ourselves out to where we don't have those students that are just throwing their hands out, waiting for us to kind of do it for them. But sometimes students are not making the progress that we want to see. Kevin, next slide.
In this video,
And so we may start seeing a lack of progress. So again, we're following that kind of planning document that I showed you earlier. We're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing, but the student just is not progressing and moving forward the way that we want them to. So if this has been going on for a couple of weeks, you definitely want to check and make sure, are you following all the steps that have been outlined? Again, that's where that planning document can come in very handy, as you can go back and really look at it. But again, if they're not making that progress, you need to go back and have a conversation with your supervising teacher. You guys will probably want to review some of the data on the task. You may need to do a task analysis. There might be another step that needs to be added in that you weren't working on, kind of like Kevin said, in making a sandwich. You can break that down to 6 steps, but you could break it down to 30. So maybe if you only broke it to 6, maybe there is a little hang up somewhere, and maybe you need 7 or 8 steps in there. So again, that's going to be a conversation that's going to happen between you and your supervising teacher. You also might need to change that response interval. So again, that wait time might need to change. The type of prompting might need to change. So again, this is all a work in progress and takes a lot of communication between you and your supervising teacher to make sure that you're making the progress that you want to make with your students. All right, next slide, Kevin. All right, like I said, we are going to email you out some of the resources that we highlighted in here. If you want more information, Affirm, the Autism Focused Intervention Resource and Modules website, has a whole section just for paraprofessionals. So again, that's a great place to go and get more information. They have one module that's completely on prompting. It takes about 2 hours. So again, it's a little bit more in depth than what Kevin and I are doing in just this quick little 30 minutes. Be watching your email for the resources and evaluation that we will be sending out. That's very important for you to get your certificate that you were here today. Kevin, next slide. So it is 9:58, so we got 2 minutes to spare. If you have any questions, throw them in the chat. Our next Parabyte scheduled training is for September 30th, same time, 9:30. So be sure you get signed up. Right now, our anticipated topic based on the survey. So if you have not completed the survey, and I'm about to drop that in the link again, please do. But right now, you guys are telling us instructional supports is what you want additional training on. So every month we're going to do this based on the feedback that you all are giving us. So again, if you've not completed this survey, please do so that we know what topics you want. When you get your evaluation, please be honest with us so that we can tweak this to meet your needs. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. Kevin, are you seeing anything?
I am not. So I'm going to stop sharing this just so we get our faces.
And you can turn the recording off.
Yes. But I do want to thank
All right.
everybody for coming. Thank you.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being with us. We'll stay on for just another minute in case somebody has a question. Make sure that you did sign in so that you get the resources, the evaluations, and make sure that you complete the survey to give us any feedback on these additional topics. And
thank you for watching this video. Please take a moment to complete our evaluation by scanning the QR code or copying the URL in your web browser.